Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ludo History, and we are back with more New World soon. Before we get started, we have a couple of announcements and a guest to introduce. So the announcements. Firstly, this will be the only stream this week. My computer has some hardware issues, so I'm glad we're seeing really good attendance already. Welcome to everyone. First-time chatters, long-time chatters, everyone. Hearty welcome to all of you. Uh, Secondly, though, this is a great time, if you have not yet, to follow and subscribe to the channel because we just finished an emote contest over in our official Discord server. And so, if you are a follower, you have access to 5 emotes, classics from the past year or so of the stream. And if you subscribe and cheer bits and all of that, you will get a bunch of new emotes. There are 5 emotes at tier 1 and additional emotes at tier 2 and tier 3 subs. And if you cheer bits at 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 bits, you unlock even more emotes. They are all genuine medieval marginalia created by actual people from actual manuscripts from all over the world. We have Ethiopian, Mesoamerican, Malaysian, and European manuscripts represented. So we have such a huge collection of absolutely delightful emotes. If you want those, make sure you follow and subscribe to the channel. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. Javier Rayon Nunez is the lead developer and writer for the upcoming game Dream of Darkness, a Lovecraftian game set in the Spanish conquest of the Mexica and the Triple Alliance that has been doing some fascinating stuff with historical game consultancy and has been truly the best and most open historical game dev we have ever seen. Oh, right. In a lot of experience we have had of playing historical games and seeing historical games, by far the most interesting and most open discussion has been coming from Javier through speaking at the Historical Games Network, publications on the game's Twitter, and many other places. Looks like your camera did just cut out though.
Yeah, but I hope that it's fixed. If it flickers at some point, do let me
Perfect.
know. But
Perfect.
thank you for that amazing introduction. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Why don't we start by just you getting to introduce Dream of Darkness and your work a little bit?
Absolutely. So, I am a big fan of history, and I hope that as many in the developer side intend to do, my dream has always been to work with history and games. And as a game developer, this is a chance with Dream of Darkness. As Adam was saying, we're exploring how the Aztec Spanish first contact happened with a cosmic horror mix. Usually, with games, and maybe we'll see that with New World, developers start with some assumptions of history and they just implement that. They add the swords, the cool armor, and there you go with a game. And it can be a very fun game. But on our case, what we did is listen to our players, find out what's more interesting to them, and that led us to then watch what are the real mysteries being studied by historians. Our players asked that we would show the gods in a more interesting way and than the usual of just, let's say, in Bloodborne or in other games that you can kill whatever entity you encounter, no matter how big they are. Our players, fortunately, Aztec fans, they said they wanted something that goes out of the stereotypes, that genuinely portrays the culture. So even though, fortunately, I like history, I'm not a historian. So what did we have to do is to actually go to experts. And we hope that based on the findings of experts and the questions of experts, we can have this cool adventure with cosmic horror with the different factions of this encounter. You will play not only as an Aztec, as a Spanish, but also as the Tlaxcalteca, the real biggest enemies of the Aztecs, of the Mexica, that we usually don't see in entertainment. So that's a game that we're currently in development.
Awesome. It sounds honestly like so much fun. I personally think cosmic horror is a great vehicle to deal with certainly the stereotypes of how brutal and frankly terrifying the gods of the Mexica appear to be. Certainly from, a Anglo-American or European perspective, right? They are metal as hell.
Oh, they are absolutely. That's the right adjective to describe them. And believe it or not, even for people here, for Mexicans like myself, they are either cool and scary or unknown. Catholicism, since the arrival of the Spanish, is super strong. It has really influenced people. So we're discovering aspects of our gods that, as you say, can be dangerous, but also, let's say, more cute and even fun aspects of our gods that we Mexicans usually don't know. For example, our god of the underworld, you can see him here, Mictlantecutli. He's this skeleton that naturally can be very scary, but in codices, he appears with chanclas. I'm not sure how to say that in sandals. He wears sandals in order to show how big of in royalty he is in the documents that survived in the codices. So usually we don't hear this because so much was suppressed by the Spanish.
Yeah, awesome. One theme, last week we had a Mesoamerican historian on, and one of the themes that came up through that kind of repeatedly was just how much history there is around and beyond just the conquest that has a lot of really rich potential for historical games. So could you go into a little detail as to why you kind of settled on going for telling this same story of the conquest and the period immediately following, albeit telling it in a very
Yeah.
new way.
Yeah, no, but it is a great question, and it's good that you're making the hard questions. There have already been movies, books, other media, even some games that depict this encounter. So, if there are so many other periods, why this one? It is a very practical answer, and that is because of the economics. In order to make hopefully more games, this first one has to sell.
Yeah.
That is the hard truth for an indie company like ourselves, or even bigger ones. So this period is more known by the public, and there's also the marketing side. That is that this year it was 500 years since the surrender of the Mexica capital. So fortunately, there were good events where we discovered more allies. For example, the Getty Institute had an event where they showed their own research on the main codex that says the more, let's say, Aztec version of events. And there are more organizations that way. So, in order to get to those events, to say, hey, can I get a ticket? It is easier if I say, I am depicting this encounter of your events instead of, let's say, the Olmecas, which are super cool, but from the pre-classical period, so far before our game. But there are no events right now happening worldwide about the Olmecas, for example.
Fair. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I think it's something I definitely will want to keep talking with you about throughout the stream because the practicalities of game design are really easy for historians to just kind of gloss over. Oh, just make the game; it'll be easy. Uh,
But you should always, as historians, as scholars, invite us in order to explore doing something as a game because currently the other problem happens. You guys are very sophisticated, very smart, and your opinion is not heard enough over the noise of other areas, let's say publishing or game marketing, my colleagues, who I love. But I prefer to listen to you guys, and you are too cautious sometimes, maybe. This dialogue doesn't happen enough.
it really doesn't. And I know, right, with the History Games Network, a bunch of conferences, the Value Foundation, the Save Ancient Studies Alliance, all those lovely folks who, some of them are on Twitch. Chat, you should all go find them. Or if they're on Twitter as well. Uh, are all trying to work on this, but we keep getting a lot of, calling out, oh yeah, we need to work together, and fewer concrete steps to actually
Exactly.
get there.
Few
Which is
concrete steps.
a problem, but something that I think is luckily starting to change. And so, on that note, thank you for coming on and being willing to help with those.
Happy to. And I was mentioning to you, Adam, before
Mm-hmm.
the stream started officially, that we really want to help you guys for this collaboration to have concrete steps, as you say. So we prepared a small survey to know how can we help you. Fortunately, we are one game, and I call the shots. We decide what to do with our game, with our process, possibly opening our process of how we adapt history into a game, the real constraints, the real problems. But moreover, we always have to have in mind that um, there are organizations out there from the game side, maybe from the historical side, that want this collaboration to happen. There are more potential allies waiting to know what are your struggles as historians, as academics who study games. But what's missing is for someone to tell them this is exactly what they want to see.
Yep.
This is how they want to collaborate. So maybe a first step is to have this dialogue. If you can, I don't know, help us with that survey that we're trying to fill.
Exactly. And I just dropped a link to it there. You can also access it at any time with the bot command !survey. So,
Thanks a lot, Adam.
uh, highly encourage anyone watching that. Will remind people about it regularly, but it is a big deal. If you can stop by, fill that out. It's only about 10 minutes. I did it last week, and it is super worthwhile just to get a sense of, how are you playing games? And that's useful data for, that's useful data for you, certainly. It's also useful data for me thinking about, why might a game make these design decisions? How do I communicate that? There's so much.
Oh,
So it
that's
is.
so juicy to see. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so useful for so many people. So please go fill that out. Let's make that data set as good as it can be. And by the way, Math, right now, thank you for the 13 months in a row of Tier 1 subscription. Absolutely
You
nuts.
rock, math. I am seeing the chat right now.
Awesome. Uh, there
I
is.
like so much your community. You guys are so cool.
There. I have the best community, and that is not an exaggeration. Uh,
Not
anyway,
at all.
so I guess I have one more kind of question. I wonder if you can go into a little bit more about how you went about sort of, especially in the early stages, working with historians on your game. Was there mostly just like working with a couple people for consultancy work, independent research? What's kind of your process there?
Oh, happy to show you. So maybe we can open one of the pictures that I shared with
Sure.
you, the very first one.
Give me just a moment to pull that up.
Sure, no worries. So any game, including ours, starts with the developers. We have a dream, but we also have historical assumptions. Any creator has some assumptions about the period they want to depict. And usually, we're going to actually share a document about this process. Usually, those assumptions do not have the benefit of a consultant like historians, game academics, but those assumptions that we devs have go straight into requirements, they go straight into developing the game. Why isn't there this verification, this dialogue usually, even with our game that happened at the very beginning? I had some assumptions about history with the knowledge that I have about our period. Um, the challenge is how expensive games are. They're super expensive to develop. They take long years. It's a very messy process. So usually we prioritize the team and the game, and we forget about everything else. So we're thinking, okay, I finally got the most talented artist, the most talented programmer, and maybe we're a team of from 3 people to 500, and they will have some ideas about what they want to show in the game. They will make the shots. We will write the requirements with what we have, with the team that we have, the very expensive team that we have, and we go forward. What changed with our case is that fortunately we're a startup as well. We're not only an indie game. So what's the difference? Both indie teams and startups are very small, but the difference is that startups from the very beginning are aiming for a big impact. And in our case, our big impact that has to happen is for games and history to fix our real world together. So that is very hard. And when my brother and I, when we began our game, well, it was almost impossible to do. But having this as something fixed, that led us to actually speaking with historians. We had to recognize, okay, if Assassin's Creed Aztec Empire were to release tomorrow, if Bloodborne 2 were to release tomorrow and they had an Aztec god, how can our game survive? So we talked with players. Like I mentioned, players want to see something more interesting than the usual stereotypes. And we recognize, okay, there are historians here in Mexico. We'll live here in the capital. So let's actually go talk to them. And fortunately, times are changing because we chatted with a historian who is a fan of games. That helped a lot.
So
So
much.
we were mutually interested. So this first historian told me, you should read Professor Matthew Restel. And Matthew Restel is a historian who is questioning now the Spanish version of events. I was very close to adapt what I get taught in school here in Mexico, which is the colonial version of events. The Aztecs were bloodthirsty, the Mexica, and the Spanish were crafty and ingenious, and a small band of adventurers conquered an empire of millions. We get taught that here in Mexico to this day. But thanks to the advice of this historian, in order to find an audience, even with our small startup, is that I read that document, I devoured it, I have it right here, and we realized, wait a minute, it is far more interesting to show that there were different groups, that the real enemies of the Mexica were not the Spanish, but the Tlaxcalteca. So that's how our process began.
Awesome. Cool. Then, since we brought up, the colonial version of events, I think this is a great time to roll into some gameplay, and we can kind of continue that conversation with a game that, in my estimation, really does not question the colonial version of events, even
Yeah.
slightly. So it'll be really
Yeah.
interesting. If certainly at any point, if you have thoughts, you see something you want to look at in more detail, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll kind of use it to kind of guide our conversation about what can games do about questioning colonialism, kind of having that meta level commentary on the narratives we're taught.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of potential here that I think both scholarship and game development is only just barely starting to scratch the surface of.
Absolutely. Excited to take a look at the game.
Awesome. So we'll just roll in here. The music will kick in. I look at this,
For example,
such a terrifying
go
opening,
ahead.
isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. Naturally, they show something scary that kind of looks like Cortés and
Yep.
the public image of the Spanish in armor. Again, that's very surely an assumption by the developers that they said, oh, what are the Spanish helmets? You Google Spanish helmets, and that's the first thing you see. Oh, it looks cool. Let's do it. And that's how we get to play this game.
Yep. The guy wearing this is English, for the record, in the lore of the game.
Okay, okay.
He's English,
Okay.
and the game is set in the 18th century.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Totally. Makes perfect sense. So
So-
to sum up the game, I suppose while we're loading in with all of the questionable screenshots, the game is set in an alternate reality where everything is exactly the same, except all of those mystical islands off the coast are a real place. Right? So any of your folklores, especially European, the weird island off the coast where spooky stuff happens, is here. This is the island of Aeternum. So, like, King Arthur was a real person who went here. The Romans went here. The Vikings went here.
Oh.
The Ming Dynasty went here somehow. And notably absent from here, as we explored last week, are any Mesoamerican peoples at all. Not a single one.
What a shame. What a shame. That's something that really had me wondering. What are the, let's say, native cultures of this island? But apparently they're not depicting anything, right?
Yeah, so they are all some just generically called the Ancients, which could not be more generic if they tried. But they built all of these weird obelisks, and now exist in the game world as skeletons. Just animated
Yeah,
skeletons.
that's one of my complaints because from this game to others like the recent Far Cry, I say, why don't we actually depict a real culture? Why don't we depict Cuba? Why don't we depict someone, the Taínos, for example, the real native people that the first Spanish encountered when they were arriving to the Isles, to the Caribbean? But I believe that in many ways, like I said, since games are very expensive to make, um, few of my colleagues are even aware of these possibilities.
Yeah,
And then they consider it too risky. They are so scared. Oh, but what if Cubans get offended? What if Mexicans get offended? That is constantly right now in the industry. And it is okay. I know that there have been some problems about how some people are depicted, but this is how quality entertainment happens by maybe depicting something more ambitious. And if you want to depict something more ambitious, well, we have to do the homework.
yeah, absolutely. And supposedly, this game actually got delayed somewhat substantially on exactly those grounds, because originally there were indigenous people in the game, and the depiction was so bad that the employees demanded that they be stripped from the game. And they brought in a consultant, and they was like, no, you cannot do this. You cannot put this in a game in the 21st century.
Yeah, which is, let's say, a better scenario than if we have gotten, like you were saying, a bad portrayal of an
Exactly.
indigenous culture.
Exactly. That is always the danger because while I would love to see, and we need to see, I think it's not just love, I think it's a demand, at this point, a demand to see better portrayals of indigenous cultures. Screwing up is genuinely dangerous. And unfortunately, I think it's a case of a lot of games, a lot of game developers, that they're not willing to put the resources in to avoid screwing up.
Absolutely. There's always this economic pressure, and it can either help you to make a better game, like I hope we are trying to do with recognizing I can't just do a regular game, I have to maybe look for a secret advantage that historians can give me. But in the case of Amazon, this economic pressure led them to another area. They decided I won't have the advantage of history. I will have the advantage of an MMORPG that doesn't require a subscription.
Yep. And I mean, Amazon has so many resources at its disposal. It's
Yeah.
absurd to really think of an economic pressure. Apart from the fact that, they have this is the first game they have successfully managed to release.
Yeah.
So,
Fortunately.
yeah. So,
And it really depends on players. If you guys share on Twitter, share whatever you prefer, that I like this game by Amazon, but this is missing. The more that you guys say that, and eventually if a game provides the value that you want, that feature, that good representation of indigenous cultures, and you buy that one, then the pressure of the industry is let's show native cultures in a better way.
sorry, I'm just going to see if I can turn down the resolution just a little bit here, because we are getting some lag. So we're just going to turn some settings down in order to ease up on the bitrate just a little bit.
Sure thing. I'm trying to read chat too. I have you guys right here, but it is hard. The
Yep.
Twitch app for for the iPad is not so good that the text is tiny. I'm like, guys, I am on a stream playing and chatting, and they don't realize I only have two neurons. I can do everything.
Okay,
So
and
actually, go ahead, go ahead.
so off to the left here is one of the kind of central quote unquote ancient thing in the game. This
Yeah.
is in the lore of the game, supposedly, sometime after the early modern discovery of the game space, of Aeternum, someone broke that obelisk. It didn't used to be like that. And as a result, no one is actually able to die. They just come back as various types of zombies.
Yeah,
I mean, it
that is
looks,
supposedly part of the appeal, right, of this island.
wealth and glory, except no one can leave. No, everyone who goes here is not allowed to leave. And then also,
Yeah.
you will eventually go crazy and become undead.
This is something that for me sounds funny because why would people still come here if anyone who comes here cannot return, cannot brag that I am rich now, so I want to buy a castle in France, I don't know.
An excellent question.
But people keep coming.
Absolutely great question that I have no answers for. Because there is no ability to be extractive for at least the past 100 years in game.
Yeah.
Right, the way that they explained it in game is that one guy in the opening cutscene survived and drifted all the way back to Europe, and then spread the news of this place to get more people to come. And might have been an agent of the vague and spooky corruption.
Halo was very influential in this kind of storytelling with very ambiguous the Forerunners as a very ambiguous culture that was just enough via environmental storytelling so that you can have some shooting around, but at the same time, like enough of an original premise of a mystery even. Eventually, as many of you know, the lore of Halo became far more complex. They actually involved politics and more. But from that point on, from Halo, there has been this very strong, let's say, trend of just make it the ancients, and that's enough for games.
Yeah. And unfortunately,
Sadly.
it's just nowhere near enough. On no planet is it enough.
It's good that you say that. At the moment, I haven't seen the demands of players, the reviews of players, but I hope that there are more people like you asking that.
Yeah, I mean, I spent about 3 weeks trying to identify any sort of inspiration, because regardless, typically, quote unquote, ancient places do draw on some sort of real world culture as the basis of their coding. And this one, it failed totally. They are so generic, being characterized by obelisks, big stone ruins, and these random ass spheres, that there's just like
Yeah.
there's no room for an identifiable material culture in here. It's
And
wild.
I believe that happens because you have a good eye. You can distinguish a culture if it exists. Well, it will have some distinguishable visual features that portray that identity of that culture, even a fictional one. If we're seeing something so generic, maybe it is a problem. But you see that as a sophisticated player. From the side of developers, many will say it's not crashing, it's okay. The textures are running well, the frames per seconds are okay. That's enough for so many of my colleagues. Actually, Math, I saw in the chat, has a very interesting comment about this. He says, it's Amazon trying to do what it's done to other industries and failing miserably because nobody in upper management has ever done games before. Maybe I can share with you guys a bit of what happens with Amazon because fortunately I had a conversation not long ago from someone in the Amazon team.
That would be awesome.
So this affects all companies. Let's say with us, with Microsoft, with Amazon. If we ever say like Amazon is trying to do this or the plan of Microsoft is X, there's already a lot of leeway, a bit of a fallacy, because any company, including Amazon Games, well, they are a lot of people, and the board themselves do not have a unified plan. One person wants something, another person wants something. So the consensus that are constantly happening sometimes are not reflecting the entire agency or plan of the director. And Amazon is one of the stronger cases because there is no vertical hierarchy. Instead, Amazon empowers so many people so that they run their own experiments, even to the even as divisions. So what Amazon as a company is doing, they are not instructing Amazon Games to follow Amazon parents' plan. They're just giving them enough resources and are trying to get a good team, hire a good team, so that they can do something interesting for Amazon as a whole. So there is no plan. Whenever in the press there is, oh, Amazon's plan for games is this, you can question that. Amazon as a whole doesn't have a plan. What we can instead see is that the head of Amazon Games maybe does have some bets. That is a better term to describe the strategies in the games industry. Fortunately, our industry is so fragmented, is so vibrant, that bets is a better way to see so much of this. So, as I believe also Math was saying, originally Amazon Games had three bets, three games, and they had to cancel two. And only this one that we're currently playing made it all the way to be published.
Yo.
And they prioritized this game because fortunately it was something that could potentially have success in the market. In contrast with the other two, we saw very little about the other two games.
Yeah, they got cancelled super early.
Yeah, hopefully this game being released, actually you guys playing it, paves the way for Amazon to not only continue this IP, but potentially saying, well, maybe we can do something with either MMORPGs or more ambitious historical portrayals. The sales of this game is really what tells them this bet is worth it. And they adjust on a case per case basis. If this game were to fail, well, they would be readjusting naturally.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the game is going to fail.
Really? Why?
Yeah, because it is a buggy mess. To put it at the most simply, it is an absolute mess of bugs right now. So, randomly, servers will skip forward a month. In an MMO that has cool, like, decay, but real-time decay on all of the upgrades.
What a shame.
Additionally, some of the other bugs include it looked like it was going to be kind of climate to, or that it's actually client based in some ways, and so if you're in menus, you can make yourself invincible. So
Oh,
there's
that is a terrible.
it is a very poorly coded MMO.
Well, let me tell you a bit about what milestones can be sometimes
Yeah.
deemed successes from our side.
Of course,
Shipping a game is by itself a success.
that's
on our
fair.
end. So when you apply for a job in the games industry, or when you try to pitch a game for a publisher to fund your title, just saying I have shipped a game, that is a star on your end. Now, obviously, if you get good sales, if you get good reviews, that is an additional benefit.
Sure.
I believe in the case of Amazon, they are deeming as a success that we got all the way to the publishing goal.
That makes sense.
And there are many games, even well-established organizations that, as you say, started as a buggy mess. For example, Steam. Steam, when it was first launched, it was awful. It
That's
had,
true.
again,
I remember
a
those
lot.
days.
Yeah, Minecraft also, when it was first launched, not on a store, it was just on the TIG forum. It crashed constantly. Anyone who tried to play the first prototype of Minecraft, the computer would crash, and yet they continued. So, what we can, if we want to get to know a bit about what Amazon's next steps could be, we can take a look at two things. One is the budget that Amazon Games has, and the other, how are they recruiting at the moment?
Fair.
These are insider tricks of our industry. Few people will tell you that.
God, the combat in here is way harder than anything else so far.
It's real time as well, right? In
Yeah.
contrast with other MMOs.
Yep. And my colleagues are not... This is a raid, so I actually need to, like, theoretically work with someone. And
In the
they
meantime,
were unhelpful.
I can read some comments from chat because
Yeah.
we have a sophisticated audience.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so I said, Math says another problem was that the teams they hired were small, mid-sized studios that had mostly worked on games on appropriate scale, and were then asked to scale up, which might be another contribution to the game's current state. Fair, absolutely. Another one by Math. Math is very informed.
Yeah.
Because what I remember from Gabe the Friends developing an MMO is like trying to develop a regular game on hard mode. Yeah, MMOs are super hard. Even a regular RPG, because of the logic that is behind it in the programming side, it is extremely hard. Now, MMO, I believe, is a curious case for Amazon. This is one of the examples where they benefit from the rest of the company. So they really know servers well, supposedly, because of Amazon Web Services. So they said, we already have a bit of the battle conquered because Amazon knows servers very well. But as you guys are playing, they're still having bugs.
Yep. Struggle. My main person AFK'd. The carry AFK'd. This is bad. This is quite bad.
Oh my god. I'll continue.
Just gonna keep running.
With the smart comments on the chat. They say, OSP YouTube says, that's a really excellent point. From the perspective of giant companies like Amazon and Google, getting something to nominally work is one of the most important goals. Completing a game at all and proving that their studio can do it is huge. Absolutely. We can even add here, they can demonstrate that to their shareholders. So Amazon and Google are public companies. So they have their investors' earning calls. And there are all kinds of investors, but in general, investors, well, they are emotional people. They are investing their money, they expect some return. So they can understand if you tell them, okay, we have made this game that shipped. It will still not be the biggest success, but down the road, based on these trends, based on these projects, it can pay out. There are some very, very sophisticated investors who can wait 10 years, 20 years in order to see a return on their investment. With games, slowly we're getting that of more sophisticated investors. Investors can also be very finicky people that are only speculating. So,
of course,
in the case of Amazon, fortunately, they have a lot of confidence on the investor side because there have been other riskier bets that they have taken in the past. From the very beginning, just selling books at a loss, the very beginning of Amazon, because originally they want to demonstrate that people wanted to buy books at a good price and with fast shipping.
yeah.
So this is something similar. They're right now very probably with a loss.
Oh, 100%.
Actually, yeah, we would have to look at the numbers or hear one of the investor calls in order to know for certain. But it is very probable that they are at a loss with this game. Yet, I'm sure they are learning valuable lessons that down the road can pay out.
Yo. Very much so. By the way, I think this is a really good example of another case where we can actually very clearly identify an influence on the game. And that is, look at how utterly generic this, like, megalithic structure actually is. Right?
Well, again, for you as a sophisticated player, I love that you call on that.
Like, this is
So,
not a
in-
plausible historical place in any way, shape, or form. It's a Dungeons and
course.
Dragons dungeon.
Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. It could give either D&D or WoW vibes. And for so many of my colleagues, that is enough,
Yo.
sadly. But you guys, since you're well organized, scholars, and I believe people who appreciate history, maybe that is slowly changing. One way to know, like I was saying before, what is going to happen next with a company is how are they recruiting.
Sure.
So fortunately, in the case of Amazon, they actually have that section on Amazon.com, Amazon Jobs. And for you guys, for your community, I took a deep dive looking for, hey, are they recruiting for historical advisors?
Ooh.
Maybe. So what do you think, guys? Do you think Amazon is looking for history advisors for their games?
I doubt it.
You doubt it. What does chat say? I wonder.
Right. Or rather, they may have a job that says historical consultant, but I do know a little bit about the consulting industry broadly, and it is, limited, we'll say. A lot of it seems to be done by, direct reaching out to people you want to work with. And then, additionally, there just aren't a lot of... The job of the consultancy might say something more grand than it actually counts as. Right, so you may be asked to provide, like, reference photos for the houses that appear in New World, and that's it. Right, that's your consultancy.
Yeah.
Hello, we are...
Great point. In that sense, it is only, as ever, a partial picture. What are companies recruiting for? However, right now, there are more jobs in the game industry than people capable for working on them. And you can see that, especially, let's say, on the programming side, there's always a scarcity of programmers. And on the other aspects, like you were saying, let's say history advisors, even producers, writers, many of those jobs are not announced. So sometimes game companies have a lack of the right talent for any of these areas, and still they are not announcing those positions. They reach out to people they know, people they want to collaborate with. Still, I looked out into this section and I found the closest thing, which is narrative designer job for Amazon Games.
Uh-huh.
To work in California, where this game is being developed.
Wow.
Okay, so
Okay, then.
What is Amazon looking for in their writers? They have this list, but there was one part that was interesting to me. So it says, no history, sadly. Instead, they're looking for writers, for narrative designers that have a passion for dark fantasy and historical fiction.
Yep, that sounds about right.
That's what you're playing.
That historical fiction is an important part. But also, as I think, in some way, extremely illustrative. In that, right... It's something you'll see if you browse Steam tags for any length of time. There is literally no distinction between medieval and medievalist fantasy in Steam's database.
Wow. And what's the difference? Do let me know,
What,
Adam.
right, so right, you might get something that says, oh, it's a historical game that might reference something. But last time there was a Steam Next Fest demo, if you look at what people are tagging as medieval, it is 95% medievalist fantasy.
So medievalist would be
Just
looks
like,
like medieval.
exactly,
Medieval inspired, something like
like
that.
Dungeons and Dragons is the classic example of medievalism.
Makes
So
sense.
it's something that has some amount of relationship to a Middle Ages, but
Sure.
not necessarily at all referring to the social structures or details of the historical time period.
Yeah.
And something you see really, really, really clearly in this game, because the faction system in this game is so 20th century. So you get, right,
Yeah.
you
the three
have
factions.
just the honor society that does martial arts and doesn't believe in religion or science or anything. You've got scientists who hate ethics committees, and you have 19th century Protestants.
Well, for many of my colleagues, sadly, that's what they're used to working. I saw a comment on chat, see, about the question that I had before for them. It relates to this. It says, "Oh, I'm not finding it. Sorry, but it was something like." Maybe sometimes the consultants, even though games may have history consultants, don't have that much of a say into the actual content that goes into a game. So that is a great point. Absolutely. Consultants in general are not as empowered into
Yeah,
what
it's
goes
very rare.
into it. Yeah.
Caroline
You
Larrington
know,
has a whole book about like her process consulting for Game of Thrones,
oh wow.
and it's just there's so much that's just very happily ignored. Right? You just don't get.
What a shame.
You'll be asked something and you'll hear stuff and then you'll ignore. It'll get ignored, and then you're done.
No, what a shame.
I know.
In our case, again, sadly, it comes back to the assumptions of developers and the economic pressures around any team. In our case, for example, fortunately, I try to champion you guys because I'm a massive. My number one love, I always say, is history. Absolutely, and if this is my dream job to try to find the good bits about history in order to make better stories. So every developer will have their assumptions, their priorities. So many of my colleagues are, let's say, art driven or mechanically driven, narrative driven.
Yo.
You can see it in the games that you play. Oh, the story is really good. Maybe the gameplay is somewhat basic or simpler, but the story is really good. Or the combat is really good. That tells a lot about the team. And the
Exactly.
other side, like I was saying, is the economic pressure. So I always say to our team that reality tends to be stranger, more surprising
Oh.
than fiction.
Extremely. All over
So
the
I
place.
always tell the guys that that we can find cool things in history that can allow for our players to have a better story. But do you know what I have to reach out in order to have examples of this? I have to reach out to other entertainment products that have taken history in order to show something fresher. I can't reach out directly to history books. I can't reach out to directly conferences by historians because sadly many of my teammates are not used to looking at those references. So the more that we can reach out to other products that have benefited from history, but other entertainment products that have benefited from history,
Yeah.
the more that they really get this argument. For example, in our case, we watch. I'm forgetting the name of this TV show. The Last Kingdom. It
Yeah,
is a TV show.
a classic example.
Yeah, so I told the guys, look at those houses. Look at how different they are from the usual either late medieval period or almost Lord of the Rings that
Yeah,
in many entertainment works usually we have. No, they're actually appreciating when there are some rare Roman buildings that are still lying around because they're somewhat more developed or sophisticated than what usually people have. The problems of not even Christians being unified, I always go to that example. I like that they even showed that this is the old name of a place and this is the current name of a place. So London,
yep.
nowadays London. And it helps, I believe, even for that show's audience to get a sense of, oh my God, this really happened. And I believe that gives an additional intensity to the events that we're seeing.
Yep. I heartily agree with all of that. I think it can in some ways be really quite difficult, I suppose. Ooh. In order to really communicate why any of that matters, but it is, I think, a very worthwhile thing to be aiming for. And it's a shame that we have to look to historical fiction, because as much as I think, Cromwell's, like Bernard Cromwell's argument and books do a really good job, and the show does a really good job, it's all still so limited that you end up with like self-replicating mythologies and pseudo-histories that are really kind of a problem. Right?
In that sense, it is. Go ahead, Adam.
The example there is, right, you'll see, right, Cromwell, I think, actually overstates the amount of Romanitas in 9th century England, or, yeah, 9th and 10th century England, which then gets replicated in, like, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then will get replicated again and again from there. So,
Interesting.
there's some cases where it feels right, and it is closer to right, but it's something that replicates itself in really bizarre and unfortunate ways.
I can imagine. Yeah. I believe the term is synopsism.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're constantly referring to the same sources and replicating the ideas and further continuing sometimes wrong ideas or wrong portrayals. In that sense, I believe that something that can help is to ask you, Adam. Let's say I'm a game developer and I'm somewhat lazy at reading.
Fair.
Let's not say reading history, reading. But I do want to make a more informed game. Maybe a better informed game can make a better game in the market.
Yep.
So, what do you think is the next step? How can I inform myself? Let's say about a well researched period, the beginning of the Roman Empire, let's
Yeah.
say.
So luckily, I mean, I think there's two things of note that I think are super useful. The first one is the big single volume pop history by respected academics. So, right, for, say, early Imperial Rome, Mary Beard's SPQR is a book that exists, and that puts a lot of the work of researching into one really nice, clean volume, because I'd say it is probably greater than 95% accurate.
Nice.
And so it's just like,
let's say
you have a one-volume
Yeah.
popular history, you can read that,
Yeah.
and it's someone who is so well-versed in the field, it's not that, and does such a good job of compiling more niche scholarship and more inaccessible scholarship, that it's all fine. That you can just go there. The other thing are kind of with increased utilization of technology and the internet, right? Seminars, interviews, all that stuff. Like the Medieval Academy does a bunch of stuff. I know Save Ancient Studies Alliance does a bunch of stuff. Some of those groups the things that they're doing, where it's more lectures that you can put on in the background, is another great resource to get academic voices without. It won't necessarily answer your exact questions, but it'll give you the broader context in which to slot in any of your own research.
So in this sense, I believe there are very innovative things here that you have mentioned that, as a developer, may not be on my radar. On one end is the term popular history. So English is not my first language.
Sure.
So um, popular history is something that many of my colleagues may not have on their radar. And as you say, it may be a bridge for this gap between something that may be harder to read, something that may be too specific, too deep on a particular topic. So developers discovering that there's this area called popular history would help a lot so that we can get more informed and in a not a very demanding way for people who may not be big readers. But the other thing that you mentioned about organizations that publish videos, that publish lectures, I believe finding organizations can be sometimes hard for us developers. We can get lost in, well, I'm Googling things, but I find JSTOR, for example,
Sure.
and I don't have an academic login to buy a paper or to buy a subscription. So sometimes the discoverability of these potential allies or these organizations that already have material can be hard for us. And I mentioned to you that I love to reach out to historians, but something in between that helped me a lot is exactly like you say. I found an organization that communicates to the public Aztec history in a very accessible way, in short articles. So that has helped us a lot. We still go to the books. You actually have a level design document that maybe at some point you can share to your audience if it's relevant. So we absolutely go to the archaeology and history books as well, but this in between reference of a public organization that its role is to communicate history. Mexico Lore is a savior in our case. It's an institute from London. If you Google anything about the Aztecs in English, you will find them.
Yeah.
That is one of the best resources. But for many of my colleagues, they are not aware that these kinds of organizations exist. They assume history is reading, history is hard, and that's it.
Yeah, that's fair. And unfortunately, reading academic histories between paywalls, audience, and just specialization is genuinely really hard. So I don't blame them for running into that problem and the frustration that comes with it.
I believe that naturally this kind of dialogue helps between disciplines.
Yeah.
Things that are obvious for you are innovative for me. And also potentially on the game side, if there were a GDC talk or
I would kill for a GDC talk.
or if there were an article, what used to be Gamma Sutra, now gamedeveloper.com, about here's how I went to this organization in order to learn more about history to make a better game, and I didn't have to read. Woo! You would get a lot of developers interested.
Yeah. And
because
I mean,
this is something very curious. Many of my colleagues enjoy history, they just have problems reading.
yeah.
And not because they're not bad readers or they're not smart. The time. They are so scared because we're so limited. Anyone is so limited with their time.
Yep. Understandable. And I mean, that's something where, like, you've spoken and written articles for the History Games Network on precisely that. So, I think really a case of practicing what you're preaching there to be the first one to really create that kind of document and really share that. And it does seem like it went over very, very well.
Thank you. I believe a lot also helps that, well, you guys have the right attitude. Many of my colleagues are very shy. speaking to someone who is not their friends or other fellow developers sometimes is scary. And so far, what I've seen of you guys, of historians who study games, not only are you super smart, but you're super fun and chill and kind.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
believe that is perfect so that this dialogue between our two worlds can happen. Actually, on my side, on the developer side, so far, on average, I think we are shyer than on your side, on historian side.
Huh. I've actually had the exact opposite experience where the first time I send out any request to, do people want to talk, if I don't already know them, the first people to volunteer are game devs.
Okay. Well, you know, maybe because there is this logic fallacy, right? That since I am around more developers, I remember more the
Exactly.
cases of, oh my god, shyness. But you who are a complete newcomer or more of a newcomer, you may get to see a more truthful version of this with your sample.
Yep. Or I get the exact opposite bias of I'm
Yeah,
around mostly
it can.
historians, and so I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, historians are all super shy, and we need to talk to each other more. Right, even aside from talking to everyone else more, we need to talk to each other more. Because literally all of my favorite things have come out of talking with people, and then it's really easy to just
Nice.
go, well, we just don't remember to do that and forget to write things with each other. And then we go off into our little bubbles of research and now only see each other at
True.
conferences twice a year. And it's terrible.
Really? Oh my god. Yeah, I can imagine. I have been very aggressive in writing to people who I find interesting. Um, Actually, we originally started chatting on Twitter some time ago,
Yeah,
and that is something I believe that is just now maybe becoming easier.
exactly.
There's Twitter with open DMs, where many of us still at home with COVID. The industry as well, the games industry, for the longest time was not has been open, but right now it is even more open
Yeah,
because very similar to what you were describing, so much of our industry used to happen at real life events, and naturally this has changed finally. Now there's more collaboration and with other fields because your events and maybe our events are both happening online, and
they
many
all
people
are.
are,
Yep.
yeah, more people are showing up.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a ton more people, but it's definitely different people showing up. Which is such a huge boon. And people from, right, my experience was largely with the European historical games scholar community. And I'd see the same dozen people at the 3 conferences every year, and that's who I'd see. But now it's like, oh, I'm seeing people from all over the world. I'm still only seeing like 30 or 40 people, which Twitch chat has that many people in it right now. Right,
You
right now
have
Twitch
the
chat is
entire
as large as the entire or average attendance for historical game studies. It's wild.
Actually, let's see chat because so many informed comments
I
you
know.
have.
Well, there was one and only one interesting thing in that entire quote-unquote archaeological expedition, and that is that the foreman was Japanese. His name was Nakamura. So,
Okay.
a single teeny tiny moment of good things, because as it turns out, there is actually a really long history of... We'll use Mexico as the, I guess, point of
Sure.
comparison here. It doesn't quite work with
Yeah.
how far east Eternum is supposed to be, but there's a super long history in the early modern period of Japanese visitors and ambassadors to Mexico. As early as like the later 1500s, there's a Japanese ambassador in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And it's one of like the main exceptions to the perceived Japanese isolationism of the 18th century mostly. That there still are visitors coming across the Pacific to mostly Mexico specifically, also the US, but from very early and very consistently, right, there's a lot of Japanese people making that trip. And so the idea that right now in our fabulous, vaguely 18th century something or other, that the foreman of this of these workers that are pretending to do archaeology is Japanese is actually super cool, and this game has so few things that are good and reference real history. I just want to shout it out whenever it does happen.
You're making the job that so many of us want to hear, because so many people, I believe, players who may not have a historian as their friend,
Exactly.
oh my god, they will look at this and think, yeah, the historical MMO by Amazon.
Uh,
No, we
yes.
have to be very specific about what games actually have researched well.
Yeah, and it's super weird, because this game, right, the environment is pretty much all variously kind of North American. There's a bison over there. Like,
Oh,
way off in the distance, there's a bison. It's North America.
wow, yeah.
But then the weapons and armor is anywhere from, this is, the breastplate here is probably early 15th century. And then all the way up through, like, Napoleonic, so early 19th century.
All over the place.
Yeah. And the houses are primarily early modern. Right, you can see the big wattle and daub construction over there. Right, wattle and daub, white beams, thatch roof. That's an early modern house by any metric. Right next to it is a log cabin. If I can walk through this water, not at all slowly. Somewhere over here, there is a log cabin. Your classic 19th century construction. Look at it.
Wow.
Right, this is
Really
the most American 19th century log cabin you could possibly ask for. I've been to museums here in Massachusetts that have this building almost exactly.
Oh, cool. Even on chat, let's see. Oh, yeah. Niram says, my sword history journey started with Soul Calibur 2. Let me tell you about misleading expectations.
Ha. Yup.
Oh, yeah. But the thing is, I have also been surprised, and many of my colleagues as well, that we have heard that maybe historians are not all the time expecting this historical accuracy. Sometimes there are other things that are more interesting or that you'd like to see in historical games, right?
Exactly. I mean, I hardly agree with that.
For example, for you, Adam, what would you love to see in historical games?
I mean, so much of it depends on the game and its setting, but generally my philosophy is I would rather see you try and tell an interesting story that in some way builds on and comments on the imaginations that have been built up over, in many cases, 400 or 500 years of the past.
Whoa.
And something that just recognizes that that is a constructed history instead of immutable fact, and uses its medium as a game to try and do something cool with that. So the one I've been playing right now, just like 2 days ago, was The Legend of Tianding, which just came out last week. It's a wuxia style beat 'em up about the Taiwanese folk hero Liao Tianding. And I am having a great time with it because it is totally buying into the legend, really simplistic account of Japanese colonialism of Taiwan, but it's recognizing the elements it needs to draw on to feel old, and then executes on that incredibly well and incredibly stylishly, and so I'm not at all upset at it for not being super accurate or super dealing with the nuances of the Japanese colonial administration and the ways it interacted differently with Han groups versus Aboriginal groups versus just different towns versus Japanese citizens.
Excellent.
And so it's
Excellent
just
example. Can you repeat the name of that game? Because now I'd like to play it.
It's so good. The Legend of Tianding. If you can also just click into the kind of video, the VODs for the stream page, and it's the most recent one there. It is
Perfect.
so.
Yeah, I will check it out.
And right, so it's not doing anything super innovative. It's the legend.
Sure.
It's telling the same legend as existed in the 1950s, or that developed in the 1950s, and so really much just accepts a post 1949 divide of Taiwanese history. But it executes on that in a really interesting way and a really stylish way that makes it compelling and enjoyable, as well as giving me interesting things to engage with. So, far more than being strictly accurate, I love doing interesting things with the cultural memory it has to engage with.
Yeah. By the way, what you said about what you're expecting, I'd love if at some point that were a pitch for a game. We have to make pitches in order to get funded. So this description that you gave for your ideal game, I'd love it if, I don't know, at some point it appeared on a real game pitch.
I would, if that opportunity ever comes up, I would be really interested to get more into the game dev side. Right now, I'm pretty content doing the criticism side, and I think there's a lot to explore in that, but it's definitely something I'd be interested in the future.
Well, you have the link to our survey.
Yep. Yeah, and I filled that out last week.
Yeah.
But
Thanks a lot.
absolutely. Speaking of which, let's drop that back in chat. If you are just joining us, Javier and the Dream of Darkness team are asking for historical enthusiasts and scholars to give feedback on how you play historical games and what you are looking for in a historical game. So it's about a 10-minute survey. Highly recommend going and filling that out.
Thanks a lot. In that sense, continuing with what you were saying, Adam, I believe that if we ask, let's say, the next Call of Duty to have this nuance that you were asking,
Yeah.
to understand that, let's say, World War II has changed how we see it according to the ages, that is so hard to do. But I believe the opportunity is by not asking so much of the big game companies, but by not even asking so much of indie games, because I have told you guys that we developers have our biases, our assumptions. Instead, I believe that an opportunity is to have organized communities of players asking for this nuance of history.
Yeah.
You can see that, for example, in queer games that explore other kinds of gender depiction. They're so well organized.
Yeah.
They're really doing their own game jams, their own conferences, and we have to learn from that. Because they're so well organized as a community, games appear that provide that.
Yep.
So I believe that this movement of history and games, if it's well organized enough, like there are clear organizations, there are clear streamers that focus on that, like you do, like the Historical Games Network, like the Value Foundation. If they are well organized and they're easy to find, then we can see as developers that there's a market for that. And perhaps a developer says, I love history, I want to provide a game for that audience, because I am one of that audience as well.
Yeah. I very heartily agree there. I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, with the History Games Net is finally making steps in that direction, I think. Right now, I think they're doing a lot of, still, very much analytical work. But starting to build towards that. I don't know if you know James Bailey, but he set up a Coding Medieval Worlds workshop last year.
Nice.
That is also moving in that way. Obviously, Value Foundation with the Interactive Pasts conferences and all of their work.
Those are so fun.
They're so fun, and so I think there's a lot of stuff that's building that direction, and it's just not quite there yet.
Yeah, we're currently doing that work from the academic side, from the developer side. What I see as a bit of friction, a challenge, is how we're spread over in different mediums.
Yeah.
So I have seen some people like you who are more sophisticated. You use Twitch, you have a Discord for your community. There are other people who care about history and games, but maybe they're only on Facebook.
Yeah.
And that is enough friction sometimes for these parts not finding each other.
Yep. And I think that's a huge part of the problem. And unfortunately, I think another part of the problem that hasn't been brought up yet is that oftentimes when someone finds a community, they aren't necessarily going to move over to other communities. So, in chat has been Overly Sarcastic Productions, the YouTube channel Blue, who is a personal friend of mine, and obviously massively successful YouTube channel, 1.75 million subs last time I checked. At you. But replicating that success, like encouraging those people to go other places, to go talk to other people, kind of expand that discourse beyond the single channel, is proven to be shockingly difficult. We were just talking about this the other day. I'm sure when I eventually persuade him to come on to continue to react to whatever this video game is, that will be a conversation that continues, but on every level, even within a platform, sometimes getting people to expand from being a community around one parasocial relationship to being a community around a network of relationships is shockingly difficult.
It is. It is. It is. In that sense, what we're trying to do is not to ask people to move, let's say, from one social network, the most basic example, to another one in order to follow a movement or a game.
Yeah.
And we're not asking people to, if they have a Twitch streamer who they love, to now follow another Twitch streamer. I believe there's a lot of friction in that sense.
Yeah.
What I believe could be an opportunity is, well, what we're doing of first trying to understand what a critical mass is looking for. I believe a lot in critical masses because of history. I loved back in the day when I was, for my enjoyment, reading about the French Revolution. And I was so surprised when I read that when it began in 1789, not all of France was in. Actually, not even all of France spoke French yet.
Yeah.
At that time. It was a movement of very few people at the beginning in Paris. And from that, it spread over. So I believe in that the same happens with almost all kinds of movements and with this particular situation. I believe that we need to find this critical mass of people who want to see history and games collaborate more. These people, this critical mass, they are pioneers. If something is hard to do, they will figure out the OBS settings in order to get a stream to happen, like you do.
Yep.
Not anyone will do that. That means that you care really about this. You will go out of your way, maybe do more things so that this movement, this stream goes to more places. And by identifying this critical mass and maybe by satisfying their needs, that's when something I believe can happen.
Yeah.
And that is that people will share the content. Because sharing is something that needs to happen so that our both sides of our industries get to collaborate in bigger ways. If I want to get, I don't know, $5 million so that your pitch that you just said actually happens, a game that is aware of this nuance of how a period, a character has been shown in different periods. Well, you need to point out that and see how much they share, I don't know, the history and games hashtag, something like that. We need to show the numbers of a critical mass growing, sharing things.
Yep, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And it is very unfortunate that it's, I think in some ways, proven to be really difficult to build that. It's something I've been working towards. I think the idea of framing it as a critical mass is hugely important. And I think the comment that we have to go where people already are is, I think, the other part there that is right on the money. Like, even just within Twitch, right, there's a reason, right, like, we ran into each other in the Value Foundation's chat the other day, and I've shown up on some of their Assassin's Creed Valhalla stuff, too, because, of course, what else do? You have to just go where people are. And
also where there's meaningful content being created.
Exactly.
That attracts us.
There's a lot of people working on this content, so it's just, we have to actually locate each other and work to build those connections, even though it's very much not an easy task.
But every day it gets a bit easier.
It does.
Gets also more interesting, more exciting. For example, I am reading from your chat, from the community. I have a pitch where it's an Ottoman Empire harem game.
Yeah.
Where it starts as a visual novel, but it becomes a political intrigue simulator where you try to be a valid sultan. That's such a great pitch.
It's such a good pitch.
Murdered in Twitter, but it's a great pitch.
Yep.
People would get scared about, oh my god, harem game. But it would sell. I believe it would sell.
Yeah. I mean, that genre, to some regret, does sell, so you may as well make one that does something with the genre.
Yeah. All this side of visual novels, it was also a form of games. Our own, we have a visual novel prologue to our game. And we were surprised because many of my colleagues don't like visual novels. There are even some players that don't like visual novels. But when we published our game and it became #2 horror game on itch.io, when we launched it, we discovered that there are so many fans of visual novels.
Yeah.
And they will only play and they will only recommend visual novels. And not even visual novels on all the platforms. Maybe they are so focused on itch.io. So the fandoms are real.
Yeah.
We just need to get to know each other, form this critical mass, I believe.
And just also wander around until we locate where other people are.
Yeah, and making it somewhat easier to find each other, like we're shooting, I don't know, bengalas, it's called in Spanish, I don't know the term. These things that you shoot and it's red and it's glowing so that people find you.
Yeah.
Flares.
Okay.
You have to shoot flares so that online people discover you. We're trying to do that, and we are somewhat provocative when there's time to do that. For example, we on purpose include one of the heroes of Tlaxcala, one of our characters, who is very provocative because he was the only one from Mexican history who did not doubt to kill all the Spanish.
Huh.
But he was, in Spanish we say majoritaire, and that is the Senate of Tlaxcala voted, the majority of them voted to ally themselves with the Spanish. So that's why he had to fight alongside them against their common enemy, the Mexica. But that's why we choose this character as one of our protagonists. Because there's so much you can do. You can give to players, and in a historically informed way, their fantasy of kill the colonial people, kill the colonists.
Yeah.
Because he did that. He was the only one who on site tried to destroy them. In contrast with the Mexica, for example, we were just curious about these newcomers. We did welcome them.
Yeah.
And that can only happen when we understand, well, what's our context? There are people who actually want the combat. And sometimes it makes sense in a historically informed way.
Yeah. And I think that's super cool that you're able to make it in that really carefully, contextualizing it into a historically informed way. By the way,
let's just hope that. Go ahead.
Another question I had about Dream of Darkness, another one of these relatively hard-hitting questions, I suppose, is the using cosmic horror, while I do like it, I think it comments on our perception of it in a really interesting of the Mexica gods in a really interesting way. Is still very much adopting a Eurocentric, I guess, imagination of what these gods are. So, what was kind of your thought process between bringing in cosmic horror elements and trying to make an anti or post colonialist game that still adopts this cosmic horror framework?
That's a very good question. So something that was surprising to me is that if we had a time machine and we went to the past and asked a Mexica, Tlaxcalteca, tell me all about your gods, even that would be something that would have a lot of answers because we didn't have a grading system that actually said, this is Tezcatlipoca, this is exactly what he is about, one of our gods. The grading system of that time in the 16th century of these civilizations was based on pictures, they were
Yep.
pictograms, codices, and people protected the knowledge because it provided them with power. So maybe you did have a codex that had the description of the god, but it didn't have all the details. It was something very interpretative. So if you knew the exact nature of a god, you were very jealous, you didn't share exactly that knowledge. It wasn't written anywhere completely.
Sure.
So it was even part of a mystery for even the civilizations that adored these gods. That's why the priests had power. That's why there were rituals, because some things were more visually shown instead of just actually said or written. And something very cool about this is that we did discover that at some point the Mexica reinvented their history, reinvented themselves as chosen by their god.
Yo.
So this secrecy, this element of gods even being somewhat mysterious for their own people, that's something that I believe can help a lot if we add a bit of cosmic horror.
Okay.
But we're not going through the usual route that many of my colleagues do, and that is let's just add tentacles.
Yo.
What we're taking from cosmic horror, from Lovecraft, specifically from his stories, is that not only gods, but even nature, reality, can be different from our human perception. Maybe some things are very hard for us to fully understand, as is the human nature. Unfortunately, there are some of the myths of our gods that relate to that. There's a bit of a spoiler, but my civilization fell 500 years ago, so deal with it. Something that we'll have in our game is that the Mexica were really worried about the sun dying
Yo.
someday. So now we know that someday the sun will die. And this is a real problem for humanity. What are we going to do? How can we avert that?
Sure.
So we'll get to see a civilization that doesn't know that that will happen in millions of years. And even if they were to know that, well, they will still treat it as a grave problem, because it is. It will end all life at some point. So seeing civilizations, real civilizations that at some point had very different concerns than us and that motivate them to do very special things, that's something that cosmic horror helps a lot. With cosmic horror, you have a lot of alienation, you have a lot of even racism,
Yo.
you have this confrontation of very different realities. So I just described only the Mexica. The Spanish had their own concerns, their own values. This clashing of alien things, I believe, helps a lot if we take what has already been well implemented in cosmic horror and not just try to reinvent the wheel.
Well, I died. Cool. I think that's a really good answer. I think it's something that really
Max
does.
has a great comment. Says, wait, a polytheistic system in which there were many interpretations and local variations, misrepresented as having a simple canon system of beliefs. It's almost like this happens over and over again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have seen this happen in I think almost every game that has tried to represent a historical right a historical system that's completely unrelated to and distinct from Christianity or
Yeah.
Abrahamic faiths. Just the sheer amount of variance consistently gets completely erased. So,
Lost, right? Yeah. I believe one way in order to solve this so that we get the nuance, but we also get something, well, that can be played in, that can be understood with limited time, is to have our game very character driven,
yeah.
very story driven. So I just mentioned Xicotencatl, one of our protagonists, the Prince of Tlaxcala. While the gods relate to him, his mission is something very grounded. He just wants to avenge his brother,
Yo.
who was taken as a prisoner to be sacrificed by the Mexica. He wants to destroy the Mexica. He hates them because they took his brother. So his brother was taken because of a ritual involving the gods. But the main thing has to be something understandable for a person. Like, I want to avenge that my brother was
Yo.
taken. I believe by having characters that have objectives that are, for each of these characters, the objective has to be the highest point in their life, the most important moment in a person that could exist.
Yo.
So we're doing that with each of our three protagonists. Many times with games, we have simplistic stories because we just want to show the cool visuals, we just want to have the cool combat. And I believe not only the story suffers when that happens, but even the historical meaning or the historical ideas that are portrayed.
Yo. I totally agree. I mean, that's something that is very much evident in this game, is that their overall story
That's what I was
has
thinking, yeah.
has some interesting ideas in it, right? Like, in addition to all the undead that hasn't been mentioned, the idea of nature as a living entity that matters and is powerful also manifests in the game as something known as the Angry Earth, which is cool, except that it is something that you can kill, right? It's something that is designed to be another enemy in the game. And so a lot of what makes it interesting just completely goes away. Because they're trying to write the story in such a way that shows off all the ongoing crisis and puts you in this dangerous world that does not like you, and that everyone is dead, dying, or wants you dead.
Sadly,
so-
they're prioritizing other things.
Exactly.
So the story comes up, and the story and the world come off as a bit bland, even though the concepts could be cool if they were better implemented.
Yeah. Because, yeah, it's not like there's nothing here. There's no... There was a good game in here, I think. But when it comes down to it, there's a big, big difference.
I believe that's why another movement is very beneficial for our historical games being more audacious, having something to say, and that is by sharing earlier what games are doing, what teams are doing. With this game, so many decisions were taken by Amazon themselves,
Yeah.
by the team. Very limited content was released. There was a beta, but basically the whole game was almost completed by that time. So if you discover that maybe the world is too bland, you can't change things if you discovered that on the beta.
Yeah, it's a
You
bit
can't
late at that
redo
point.
the world. It's too late. So that's why what we're doing is having these kinds of dialogue, releasing content far earlier than usual in doing. We're releasing content in our production because I believe if this critical mass, if people who love history, who love narrative, tell us this is not working or I'd like to see this, only in pre-production can we make the necessary adjustments.
Yeah.
That's what we did with our 2D prototype. We discovered, for example, that even though visual novel people were very happy with our game, uh, there was a bigger majority who said, I only get scared in 3D. If it's in 2D, it's too hard for me to get scared. And it's a cosmic horror game, you run into trouble if there's no
It's
tension
not scary? Yeah.
happening. Yeah. Yeah. So fortunately, since we had this prototype, this prologue as an experiment, as a bet, like I was saying, like we're trying to find out what people like the most, what they want to improve. We were able to make the switch to 3D earlier. In contrast, maybe Amazon did discover at some point, like you said, the native people are not being well depicted. Well, they couldn't redo them; they just scrapped them,
Yeah.
and
And
you got
that's
something very generic out of that.
exactly what happened. And Tiki Power says that apparently only the PvE aspects of this game, so, most of the game, were only made a few months before the beta. Which is
Oh
just
my god, really?
wild.
Yeah.
It's wild to me that, given that, and given that the game was in development for something like 5 years, that there's... Like, what did they spend all that time doing?
Oh, let me tell you a bit. So
Please.
sometimes we think of games as what we're seeing is a product out of intention. Like this was the plan, and we are getting to see. I don't like this, but this is what I hear a lot in the press. We are playing Amazon's vision of what their game is. But most games are actually compromises.
Uh-huh.
There are consequences of lots of forces that want to destroy each other. So
Fair enough.
it is very probable that, like you say, at some point there was a plan or there was an intention of something far more interesting, but it gets destroyed in a way when you have to switch probably the developers that are working on the game. Because they were recruiting constantly and they were creating this game. Getting new people on board for a game, that slows down any production
Yeah.
by a lot.
Of course.
And two teams got into this game when it was already advanced. Two additional teams.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it was originally, and it's still Amazon Games Orange County that developed this game, but the teams that were working on the other two canceled games by Amazon, Breakaway and Crucible, when their games were canceled, they joined this team. Just that
Lord.
can slow you down by months.
Yeah, that is
And like
wild.
your very informed chat mentioned, some of the developers, not many, but some of the developers were not used to these kinds of games. Maybe they had done very cool games or very cool applications for Kindle or for the Amazon store for Android. But this is an entirely different thing. In principle, if you know how to program, you can program for anything. But now in the particulars, it takes time. And that's
Exactly.
where development time goes.
And I have no idea if they used a custom engine or like modified the engine in any significant way for this. But
Yeah, good question.
if they were doing
Usually
any
they
engine
do.
work, I assume that
Yeah.
gets even worse.
That's how we know that Amazon supposedly is in games for the long term because they have their own engine, Lumberjack.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if you think of just testing one game and that's it, you don't have a custom engine.
Yeah.
You don't have your own engine. But Amazon did acquire a company back in the day because they want to have their own engine, because they believe it's worth it. They will have lots of games apparently running from that engine. Actually, any developer can use Lumberjack. They really want to get more people into their ecosystem.
Wild. As it turns out, I was not strong enough to go take on the guy alone. So instead of doing that, we're going to do some side quests for the rest of the stream. Cause
That's
taking
good.
out
That's
taking out
good.
that guy with the mask was not going to happen. I couldn't get kills quickly enough to stop anyone from respawning. Which
Yeah.
actually is an interesting question, I guess, to ask. Right, given your experience in games, right, one of the things that stands out to me here is just how few consequences there are for anything we are doing. Right, everything we're doing respawns in moments. Right, I could cut down every tree in this forest, and by the time I'm done, I'd have to cut them all down again because they'll have regrown. Which is odd to me when you're thinking, of a historical game. Uh, what we actually
What
do,
kind of
right?
feedback would you like to see? What
Exactly,
consequences?
right. How do you approach like giving players agency within a historical setting while also preserving, the fact that there's consequences and agency means that players will screw up the history.
So, many games have to deal with feedback, with consequences, but as let's say a double-edged sword. On one hand, it sounds super interesting as a player that your actions change the game, change the story, but that is super expensive in terms of game development resources.
Yeah,
If you actually, even Mass Effect, that had a talented team that had a lot of resources with EA, when it came out to their ending, and they had promised people that they would be able to make so many choices, the actual endings, well, just variations, color variations,
yeah,
because actually taking into account all the variables, all the decisions by the player in order to give a meaningful answer is super hard.
yep,
So by being very honest about every team, what battles we want to tackle, what problems we're going to fix, where our game will be special, is that we choose if we go into that route of your choices matter. It is very hard to give a satisfying game with your choices matter.
sure.
If you're going to go that route, maybe you have to devote less resources in other areas. Let's say I was just playing for our players Zelda, Breath of the Wild. So, as you know, the narrative is somewhat simpler, it is
Yo,
somewhat sparse on that game. So, they chose not to do something compelling in that area, in the narrative, in Your Choices Matter, but they have something different. They have this uh, wide world. And moreover, there's this aspect happening of emergent gameplay. You're all the time discovering new things that you can do. Maybe you
yeah,
can cut the trees, as you were saying, and that builds a bridge. And thanks to that bridge, you can cross over to a new area. And that's becomes an emergent story. In order to do that, Nintendo, I shared with our players the process. Nintendo had to suffer a lot because that was not their plan. There
yeah.
was a conference in Japan where they shared their process in Japanese, obviously. So I have with our players a show called Gamers, Developers, and Scholars. So I showed to
Awesome.
our players um, slides of that presentation by Nintendo. And since when they were testing the game Breath of the Wild with their players on a prototype without any of the final assets of the game, this is very important. So they were still able to make significant changes in contrast with this title. And they discovered that players were getting bored with the original plan by Nintendo for that game. That's when they made so many changes that we see with Breath of the Wild. For example, that when you have an objective, it's never a straight line. There's always an obstacle on the way. Nintendo called their framework the triangle rule. So
Okay.
you would always have an obstacle in the shape of a triangle. These allow
Huh.
players to have to choose either to go straight over your obstacle to the left or to the right. And always to the left, to the right, you would see something new that because of the obstacle you were never able to see originally.
Oh, I
So
love
that's
that.
how, yeah, so that's how what I was saying, emergent gameplay, emergent storytelling happens. So as you see, if you want to give to players a kind of benefit, a kind of fun, there are so many connected pieces that you have to adjust in order to get that consequence. And it all comes back to where do you want your game to stand out?
That makes a lot of sense. Which, on that vein, only makes me more confused about New World because, I mean, I can't really say that they're clearly the PvP was the thing they thought they wanted to stand out on, right? Be an MMO that is not a subscription, that has a UI that isn't painful to look at, and then has good PvP.
Maybe those were the choices. I believe, like I mentioned to you before, that maybe the battle that they really wanted to win as a company is let's just finish a game.
Fair. Also, entirely possible.
Yeah, because that is so hard. Oh my god, it is so hard.
Yep.
For the longest time, it was really the talk of the industry that Amazon is just buying a lot of things. People are getting recruited for Amazon, but they are not able to ship a game.
Yeah. They were failing for the longest time at actually shipping the game.
Yeah, now the conversation is something else. Now it's how can we make an actually good game, maybe a more ambitious game
True.
in some aspects.
Yeah, and I really hope that that happens because, right, there is some really weird historical stuff in here. Right, there's a late game expedition that I'm going to have a specialist in Qing history on, where there's like a Chinese empress just like arbitrarily here in Eternum. It's weird, but that's gonna be way down the road on the Historians versus New World series. But then, right, like they have some really weird things. The one I always show people is in right here. They have a treatise on magnets that then says, quote, as Gilbert states, knowledge of magnets is present across all of the world, from the earliest Greek and Jewish and Egyptian scholars to far and distant China, with many years of study being dedicated to their effects. And elsewhere, in a dialogue, they mentioned like Newton and the microscope as being people who and inventions that exist in this world space. And so, right, just with all these choices that seem to be unrelated to the history, I then become even more confused why they're being so explicit about this being a historical setting, which has Judaism, which presumably has Christianity, and then there isn't any understanding of what that means or care as to what that means, and yet they do it anyway.
I believe that so many of developers are not aware of the consequences of just throwing in mentions of Christianity, of Judaism. They just think, oh, it works for this maybe quest or this document without thinking of the world impact of including that.
Sure.
In that sense, Adam, can I come back very quickly?
Absolutely.
I won't take more than a minute.
Absolutely. We are just doing some item management right now.
Just a moment.
Yep. In the meantime, remember, if you want to learn more about Javier and his team, make sure you follow them on Twitter at DreamDarknessVG. And there is a survey that the team is doing on historical games, gamers and historical game studies. So if you are interested, sincerely go try and fill that out while we are in this little bit of downtime. In the meantime, chat, if you have any final questions for Javier, we probably only have about 20 to 30 minutes left. Not a long time left in the stream. So if you have any final questions, get them out. And if you guys like this is also a great time to say, hey, maybe if you like this, follow, spread the word, and consider subscribing to the channel. Because so much depends on your guys' support, and this is a great time to do it because, as I said at the beginning of the stream, we just recently got a whole bunch of new emotes. In fact, just today, we got a whole bunch of new emotes. So this, if you are a follower, you have access to 5 emotes from the classic library. If you are a tier 1 subscriber, you have access to 5 brand new emotes, and then with bits, bit tiers and higher subscription tiers, you unlock even more emotes. So all of those supports go right back into the channel, and help me keep getting more guests and more games. So please sincerely consider subscribing to help support it. Everyone who has followed, subscribed, etc., it has been excellent. Your support is appreciated, but yes, great time for announcements. Sadly, Leander, we don't have any particularly silly hats, so I'm going to give you a baseball cap instead. Nailed it. And then we shall start making our way to the last 2 of these. We should have enough weight for that. Yeah.
Back. Sorry, work doesn't stop over here.
No worries.
Oh my god, and you're getting such informed comments.
I know. We're just doing announcements, but the comments have been, as always, an absolute delight.
Yeah, I want to read this comment by Lender Taker.
Yep.
It says, a game can, in my opinion, be primarily carried by their story alone. Like Pyre, the story and visuals and music of which is amazing. It's Supergiant games after all, but the gameplay is just 3 versus 3 basketball, or can be carried almost solely by gameplay and level design, and both can be a great, enjoyable game, while a decent story and decent gameplay all of a sudden is not a good game anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I super like that comment.
More developers should hear that comment. So many of us are so scared. There's this, like all fields, there's this syndrome or feeling your work is not good enough, your game is not good enough. So many, especially in the AAA side, they want to have supposedly everything perfect. The best music, the best visuals, especially the visual side. So much is devoted into that. Well, as you say, maybe sometimes a great story is enough. Maybe you can have AA visuals. Maybe you can have a shorter game. Since sadly there's this comparison of X amount of dollars for X amount of hours,
Yeah.
many feel pressured to give everything, give lots of content. But maybe, fortunately, now there are a lot of players who are more sophisticated and who want something deeper and more meaningful instead of just longer or bigger.
I think that's very true. That's something that I've been really gratified to see. Just like browsing Reddit, once in a while, it starts looking like maybe they're finally having the same conversations scholars had 15 years ago. I mean, yeah, it takes time, but it's good to see that, right, the game's audience, in a way that really hasn't happened since, before Gamergate, is really starting to expand, and develop in a really meaningful and useful way, and become a more mature field. Which is cool.
Fortunately, absolutely. The discourse is maturing. I believe in lots of ways. One of the factors is we as players are now older. Maybe we played when we were younger and we didn't have lots of informed ideas. Also, more people can now share these better informed ideas in more ways on the internet. But there's also something that we can see is that we shouldn't take for granted, and this is the call for diversity.
Yeah.
And I like to say it as meaningful diversity. When many games were developed, when our industry, especially in the US, was started, it was mostly what could we do with limited hardware. That's why some of the very first games like Space War was done by scientists.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, technology is not that much of an issue. One of the bigger issues instead is, well, like we have described, how can you have a game that resonates with an audience? A big game, a small game, it doesn't matter. How can it resonate with an audience? Profitability can happen later.
Yeah.
However, many colleagues are not aware of this change. Epic Games, for example, already has deals like this where they say to developers, don't worry that much about how many copies you sell. We'll cover your costs. Just ship a good game and naturally give us exclusivity to that
Yeah.
game.
Yep.
The Apple
And
Store with Apple Arcade also has deals like that. Go ahead, go ahead.
right, for all the shit the Epic Game Store has gotten, like their free game selection being just like a guaranteed payout for devs, and then giving consumers, a game that they might otherwise never pick up for free,
Sure.
guaranteed payout for the devs. Right, you're never gonna make the most money off of it, but it seems to me to be a really reliable way to make sure that your game at least does okay, and that's a big deal.
Absolutely. I believe it is hard sometimes for developers and part of the press to understand this new economics where it is far more important to find an audience, make the audience happy than the dollar per dollar of each pixel. And while fortunately players like you are maturing and appreciating the good deals that you might get from Epic, there are still other sides of our industry that maybe they're frustrated and that don't know how to express their frustration. There's always this I hate Epic, I hate XYZ, and that can overwhelm the discourse.
Yeah.
That noise doesn't allow some developers to confidently say, I will make this smaller game, but that it is meaningful, that is deeper, because there will be Epic or there will be an organization that takes care of my costs, and there are these players who are expressing that they want this deeper nuance.
Yeah.
The noise sometimes doesn't allow us to connect these dots.
Which is really unfortunate. And I mean, some of the folks in chat I know are doing community manager work for game studios, so I'm sure they have a somewhat different perspective on just how far it's matured, and how far there is to come yet.
Yeah. Another comment by Lean Their Taker says, and understandable if you're maybe afraid that someone in Amazon, I will add in with any company, will decide to pull the plug after years of literally no output at all. Yeah. It is something that can get developers scared. You've been working on something for 5 years and suddenly, boom, it's canceled. And to add some nuance to this, there are NDAs that limit so much of our
Yep.
industry. Let's say that you are a consultant for a game and you have really found cool things in history in order to make a game better. And you got developers that listen to your good ideas, to your awesome research. Oh my god. Beautiful. The game is cancelled. So because of contracts, nothing of this gets to see the public light. Your documents, your research, so much of this just disappears.
Jeez.
Terrible. Yeah. That's why we do the opposite with our team. I invite the team to, we tag them when we share content of our game in this pre-production stage. This way, not only can we discover what you guys prefer, but they also get credited we don't have these crazy NDAs that limit our industry.
Awesome. That is a super appreciated thing. I've not been under too many NDAs for my work so far, but, right, there are definitely cases where you can see, like, there's a whole lot of stuff that would be cool to talk about, but then you're just like, wait, can I actually, can I not? Is that going to cause a problem? And then just the threat of that is sometimes enough to be really frustrating to deal with.
Absolutely. That's why every stage in a game company has its benefits. Many people are scared about being a startup, about this smaller stage, but it actually has some advantages that Nintendo, Amazon, other companies don't have. Right now, I can talk about whatever I want. I can have my teammates without these restrictive NDAs because I haven't signed a deal with a publisher or because I don't have shareholders. The moment when any of these events happens, naturally an investor says, but do you have your contracts in order? And the conversation changes.
Of course.
You can get sophisticated investors who understand that maybe the NDAs are not the best of ideas, but there are not so many of those sophisticated investors.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the idea of trade secrets seems to be still a thing when I think you and I both agree, right? Everyone benefits when everyone gets to talk to everyone else.
Exactly.
Right? This isn't. Yes, it is a competition in that there is money at stake, and not every game is going to be profitable. But at the same time, there's so much expertise that just gets left out on the floor because people who used to be in the industry can't give advice, don't know what projects are going on. People with expertise in analysis don't get to be involved in design. Interested players have to rely on the whims of, does the game have a marketing budget? In order to actually, like, get to support projects that they would be really interested in.
Yeah, we need absolutely to solve these issues. A consequence of not solving this, let's say, exit of talent from our industry because they get so frustrated because they're so limited is that we're getting people who on the job learn a lot even when a game is canceled. But
Yeah.
naturally, a programmer gets frustrated and maybe he will get to work now on a bank or something else that will pay the bills, but his knowledge of the game industry now has left us.
Yeah. It's just gone.
It is a tragedy. It is happening so much, people exiting, and sadly, because not all positions are advertised, you get new people whose dreams are to join the games industry, and they will take any position, any kind of jobs, any kind of hours. So we're constantly getting new people, and they're getting tired, they're getting frustrated, and they exit the industry. This is a vicious cycle that has to be fixed.
The Guardians were put to sleep when the towers went active. The towers provided.
Sorry, I was just looking at those discs, because there are, like, I mean, there are constellation maps as old as the Bronze Age, and I think older than that. Right, some of the oldest drawings, like cave art that there is, has been postulated to be depictions of constellations. So, the idea that they were just having these little clay discs with holes poked in them was such a boring way to do it. I mean, effective. You can shine a light on that and then you get a projection. But, right, there's one that... For a moment, I thought they were based on one made in bronze from, I think Denmark? I know it's in Denmark these days, but there's some really cool Bronze Age sun discs.
Now, if I can just figure out how to activate this sphere.
And now we're giving them to
Not
this
for me.
guy to do stuff. But we will, I
And
think...
of course, the unfortunate fact is that everything points to the shattered obelisk as you have to make your own choices.
I think we will probably leave it off here, because we've been going for a bit over 2 hours.
Oh
So
wow,
I think...
time flies.
I know, right? It was already so quick. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And so I just have one final question. Well, two final questions. First off, if you woke up tomorrow and Amazon was like, hey, you're now the creative director of New World, as a historical game dev and someone who's passionate about history first and foremost, from what you've seen, what's the biggest thing that you would change?
Oh, I would absolutely add a native civilization that are enemies. And I would add that knowing full well that people get tense about this. But I would add it in a way that makes you, the colonial people, the bad guys. Like you actually should feel bad that you're taking over their territory and that you're getting your outposts, that you're. I would add an interesting conflict because I believe, like your chat said, when you have a good story, at least the stakes are high, then you will forgive so much. You will forgive maybe the bugs. You will forgive that the mechanics could be simple. But right now, I'm not seeing this conflict as something interesting. And
Yeah.
I know that so many people want to explore this dynamic of native people versus colonials versus colonists. So if you add that conflict, I believe you absolutely have an interesting game. Maybe not the best game. Naturally, that would be hard to pull off, but it can be a game that has an identity.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that would actually play into the faction system really well, of that, suddenly everyone's fighting each other, and also instead of some vague end of the world thing, they're fighting against someone discreet that is portrayed carefully and complexly, and that also is fighting amongst themselves. And then really give the
Exactly.
players room for the factions to make alliance with NPC factions,
Yeah.
to work with each other, to break alliances, and really create an interesting, if deeply flawed, and necessarily flawed, argument about how do small polities in a colonial environment interact with each other.
Nice.
I think that would be super
Yeah.
cool.
I have to tell you, originally I thought that was going to happen.
That's what I
with
was
this
hoping.
game.
That's what I was hoping this game would be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sadly, here we are. Then the very last
Maybe
thing.
next time.
Maybe next time. Very last thing. If people like this, where can they find you?
Sure. So we're always happy to hear your sophisticated questions at our Twitter. If you go to Dream Darkness VG, you can find us there. And we are constantly looking into ways for our two worlds to collaborate more history and games. Just this week, we're going to. I was actually writing right now our historical process, our process to hear from you historians to make a more informed game. And I hope that people care about this. The more that we find that people care about this, more games can happen in that direction.
Awesome. So, yeah, and I just dropped one more time the link to the survey. Chat, if you saw this and enjoyed this, please do go fill that out so to give Javier and the Dream of Darkness team more information to help make informed design decisions. Because I, for one, am extremely excited for your game, and I hope that like as it gets closer to release, that we'll get to talk again about it and see kind of what's changed, 6 months down the line or so. Just as the development
Absolutely.
goes on, I would be love to stay in touch and kind of keep getting to see how the design evolves as we get closer
Yeah,
and
we
closer
have to
to a
keep in
finished
touch.
product. Yeah,
Yeah, I have to listen to what happened once you made that awesome pitch. If you actually pitched that, because I know that people would fund that.
that would be very interesting and exciting. I've got to finish grad school first, but maybe after that.
First things first. I know.
Exactly. I'm halfway through a degree. I can't exactly walk away now. Anyway, chat, if you enjoyed, make sure you go follow the Dream of Darkness on Twitter, and make sure you follow me here on Twitch, because usually we'll stream multiple times a week on a variety of historical games. No more streams this week, unfortunately, due to having to send my computer in for repairs. But stay tuned because there's a lot more interesting things coming up. I know that I've already got a guest lined up for the Assassin's Creed Valhalla Oscorea event, which just started today.
Ooh.
So I've got an expert in the Wild Hunt specifically coming on to talk about the Wild Hunt. So stay tuned for that. But otherwise, we will see you all next time. I've been Adam. This has been Javier. And this was Historians versus New World. I think we survived one more week. Awesome. Have a good day, everyone.
Great day. Bye.